The best decision I made about this conference, and as it turns out, I've made a number of very good decisions, was inviting our guest speaker to join us. Chip Cooper, I first heard about him when my sister was raving about him because he was a featured artist at her conference in Alabama. And when I saw his work, I knew why she was mesmerized. And he has been such a hit, such a hard worker, and as you will soon see, such an amazing artist. I don't want to introduce him. I certainly have thanked him in many ways, but I wanted to bring up someone to introduce Chip, who is a lifelong friend and fan, and that is Jamie Forbes. And Jamie is the co-owner and co-founder of Sunstorm Arts Publishing Company. Jamie is the publisher of Fine Art Magazine. She is a co-owner of a number of galleries. She's the director of the Fine Art Museum of Long Island, and she has exhibited and displayed art all over the world. And she will tell you what she thinks about Chip. Please welcome Jamie Forbes.
Hi. Okay. Chip and I were in Vance 3 summers ago. Okay, we were there for a notable artist. He had hosted us in the south of France to a fundraising ball for his foundation. The Alabama 13, that was Chip's show, were being shown or showcased along the Riviera, the Côte d'Azur. To my pleasurable surprise, I ran into Chip Cooper the first night. He immediately befriended me. Chip was in the company of many notable Southern businessmen. He was in the company of academics from the University of Alabama, as well as 12 other artists. This was an eclectic group. The art was from all over was excellent. Most of the folks were fun to be with. So there we were in Vance with the Alabama 13 and an entourage of people from the business sector. Some thought of themselves as Southern aristocracy, and probably were just that. Others members of the State Arts Council. Our group included the governor of Alabama and his wife. Chip and they were really quite friendly. We all ran around the Riviera, this band of Alabama's finest, a diverse representation of the fruit of desegregation. Prince Albert hosted us to cocktail parties. The Prime Minister of Monaco hosted us to cocktail parties. We all went swimming in the social sea of the surrealistic, figuratively and literally. I had been in these particular waters before, afloat in champagne and caviar. My new friend Chip told me he had not. It is my belief to be surrounded by gold leaf lampposts and the finest of world-class yachts in Monaco Harbor is a fairly heady waters to be in. Black and white, rich and poor, all in the mix. Chip knew all. He was the same with everyone. Warm and gracious. Chip took photos all the while. Observing Chip, I saw that he never changed, always seemed to be himself, drawing on his immediate experiences for his art, unaffected by his surroundings. This can be said of very few people I know. Okay? All right. Now, I want to tell you about Chip's 4 books. Okay? Chip has written, or he's photographed Common Threads, 1999, CKM Press. He has, all his photographs appear in Silent in the Land, CKM Press, 1993. Hunting the Southern Tradition, 1987. And Alabama Memories, 1989. And, excuse me. This is what Harper Lee has to say about Chip Cooper. Thank you for the wonderful common threads. I do believe that you are a very great American photographer, plus Georgia O'Keeffe rolled into one. O'Keeffe because you have her eye. You paint with film. Okay, and this is from Robert Stevens, Time Magazine, Associate Photo Editor. Finally, a marvelous book about the South, a refreshing body of photography without the cliche images that are all too familiar, a new and fascinating viewpoint which will delight all. Okay, and then Chip graciously asked me to write something for his book, and I did. So I said, a common threads casts a light of change in the soul of the South. Almost imperceptible to the casual observer, the metamorphosis is seen through the ingenious eye of Chip Cooper and set to tales all can relate to by Catherine Tucker Wynnum. We are able to share the universal air of transition like a rusting over time, as if looking through a common family photo album. We are invited to step into the photographs and the human stories, regardless of where our memories are rooted, and participate in the joy of the experience. Chip has a rare ability to, it's like an alchemy, to take the atmosphere that he sees translated into a photo and give us an image that we can uniquely see as Chip's own, and then it becomes our own. So, thank you, Chip.
I thank you all for coming. I'm at the tail end. I know this is, if you feel like me, this has been a great 2 weeks, but a hard 2 weeks. I'm sorry my sidekick is not here with me because she met Beth in the women's bathroom that took me out to meet Robert, and it all came together just in 5 minutes. And we've been corresponding, emailing since February to pull this together. I was born in Savannah, Georgia, moved to Huntsville, Alabama, went to prep schools, military schools, had the opportunity to go to Chapel Hill, but because of lack of female companionship, I chose the University of Alabama. I don't think that I really had a creative thought until I was about 19 years old, and my mother, or 18, my mother got involved in an arts program in Alabama, and she started bringing home books of Cezanne and Rubens and Picasso, no photographers. But all of a sudden, I'd been reading all my life, and I had an imagination through things, but visually I had not connected. So I enrolled in an art course. You had to take studio art to get into any of the other fields. So I was trying to draw, and if any of you have taken any kind of art classes, most of the people in there have been drawing since they've been 5 years old. And I could do stick figures. And the professor came along one day and he said, "Cooper, you're so bad, you should just take a photograph." And that's literally how it started. And I picked up a camera, and that rectangle became my life. It changed my life. All the things that maybe I had felt as a young child, the discipline, the hard work, the Protestant ethic that I grew up with, all of a sudden started taking hold with me through that rectangle. And I ended up in a mental institution taking photographs. It was my first photography job. And within 2 years, I thought my career was completely over. I was 23 years old. I had an office down this floor. I had really long hair, and a lot of the patients thought that I was Jesus reincarnated. And a lot of the people that were there were from country towns and had flipped out, I thought, because of religion. And when they saw me coming along, it was redemption. But something happened, and I went to the University of Alabama shortly thereafter, where I still am director of photography and teach in the art department. But I had an opportunity to go back in if we can hit the lights and we'll start looking at slides. I had the opportunity to go back over a 2-year period, and while I was there, I shot a lot of photographs. Over this 2 or 3 year period, I would just drop in and out and take photographs. And the subject matter, as you can tell, with people on psychotropic drugs, Ritalin, all kind of things. I can tell you firsthand, I was there at Christmas and I had a cold. I went to the pharmacist and I asked him if I could have a cold pill. About 2 hours later, I felt like the Jefferson Airplane song. I was about 12 inches tall, paranoid. They'd given me a cold pill that had psychotropic drugs in it, and it took about 12 hours to wear off. But over the course of this time, I was able to, as Jamie was talking about, draw upon the environment to show things to explain to other people about mental illness. It's a hard scene to photograph. It's a hard thing to walk away from, and I shot these photographs and did not print them until this past year. And in all my books, except the hunting book, and I'll talk about that in a minute, there are no people. And I think as a result of these photographs, I just kind of moved away from people into the landscape, and this conference has brought me full circle into incorporating the landscape and the authors. The hunting book was my first book, and everybody's talking about how to get published, whatever. I submitted some photographs to Taylor Publishing Company in Dallas, and they chose me to do a hunting and fishing book, and I wanted to do an art book. After about 6 weeks of negotiation, we narrowed it down to hunting. I spent 2 years of my life. I was not a hunter. I had to learn all this stuff. And I think the discipline that I pulled upon helped me do the book. Sent the photographs in. I never heard anything. I called up a guy and said, "What's happening with my book?" He said, "Well, my book is in production, and you have to understand, I have 30 bastard children like you." And it was just a real downer. And then I got the book in the mail. And so I contemplated for a while and thought about what my next move would be, and I'm now 35. And I found myself drawn to New York City, that if I was going to be turned down, I'd rather be turned down at 35 than at 50. So I went to New York with my hunting book. And for 18 days, I went up and down to every publisher I could get my hands on. And on the 18th day, and the 18th publisher, W.H. Smith, who had just moved from England to New York, wanted to do a book with me. And I had my first chapter, last chapter, I had photographs. I wanted to do something on the South, and he said, "Why not do Alabama?" Surprised me. And this was now November, and we agreed to everything, and I said, "Okay, what's the deadline?" And he said, "April." And I said, "Okay." I walked outside, threw up, and produced the book, because that was my only opportunity. You know, I would have liked to have had 2 years. And in the course of those 4 months, I rediscovered my state, I connected with the South, and became a landscape photographer. Silent in the Land, architecture book came shortly thereafter, and then Common Threads was to me my most notable achievement, because I teamed up with Alabama's Eudora Welty, 82-year-old woman, Catherine Tucker Wyndham. And we had wanted to work together, and we sat down at her kitchen table. As Dr. Rose said last night, the book bills, it's the same thing with a photography book. The guy that was fronting the money, because to do a photography book costs about $100,000 for 10,000 books, just the beginning, without any other publicity. And so it's a lot of money with the images. And he kept asking, "What's the book going to be about?" And I said, "Well, it's going to be about vignettes." He said, "We can't put vignettes on the cover because most people in Alabama wouldn't know what a vignette is." So then I said, "Okay, it's Common Threads." And it's weaving in and out. So now that brings us up to today, and I have gotten into the digital part of photography as a tool in the last 6 months. What that does for me as an artist is that it enables me to take my image, and I do the printing. I decide what's going to be red, yellow, green. I decide how big it's going to be. When you send your work to a printer, it's no different than when you send your work to an editor and they put lines through it. I never got back what I envisioned in my mind. So one of the key things about photography is when you're taking the photograph, there's a definite feeling going on. What's happened in the last 6 months is the heart kicks in, because now I'm looking at my images on a monitor, I'm spending more time looking at them, and I'm producing, for me, some of the best work I've ever done. Now people say, "Why not the traditional darkroom?" Well, I still do that. But there's something to be said about walking in and not having chemicals on you, and walking in early in the morning, late in the afternoon. You don't have to mix chemicals. And so this has been a big revelation to me. I like to photograph small things, small places. It's a sense of place, whether it be in Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi. I saw this wall in Demopolis, Alabama, and I looked at it and I looked at it, and then I saw that there was a woman back there, and the use of the exposure colors brought her out. I'm amazed about churches and in the landscape, and I photograph a lot of churches. I saw this, and it doesn't look like this, but I thought it was like something of a mystery. And so I put it in Photoshop and did my manipulations. But most of my photography is fairly straight photography. It's like my poetry, my short story. Do I have an intention to where to take the viewer? I might, to begin with. And then in the groupings that I put together that might one day be a book, yes, I do have a feeling that I want somebody to have, but maybe not so much a meaning. Over the period of time, the wear and tear on objects creates something else. This is a 5-inch by 5-inch corrosion on an automobile, but to me it was a dancer. This photograph is monumental, in that I'd been talking to my daughter, who is now 26 and getting ready to get married, but she came home one day and she said, I just don't understand why I have to be a Southern woman, because everybody thinks that I'm a bubblehead. And she was just ranting and raving. And that afternoon I was down in the country and I saw this wall. And the wall was angst, and on the floor was a doll. And so I constructed this photograph, put the doll up there, and what was missing was the bubble. And I found it out in a field, and I put this together, and this is Liza. This is a church, a church in Columbus, Mississippi. I play with light. I play with waiting for the right time of day. So it requires sometimes having to wait 6 hours, 7 hours for the light to happen. Do I stay in one place? No. I go somewhere else and find another location and then come back. Sometimes there is a story with a group of photographs that all pull together. This is a plantation that's down in the south of where I live. And a guy from Boston bought this plantation and commissioned me to photograph it before they renovated it. And so I took his photographs, and then I took these that tell a story. And it defines a sense of place, a sense of mystery, that people once lived here. And then I came to this, and it's like a transition. This is my transition photograph into what's getting ready to happen to this house. And as we end these photographs, everybody's spirituality can be found somewhere. I happened to be in a gymnasium that the roof had fallen off, and Blakely was with me, and we were getting ready to give a talk. And to take my nervous energy, I took my camera out to this gymnasium that still had the wooden basketball floors, but there were trees growing up. And I looked up into the trees, and I saw this. Traveling for me, as Jamie was saying, I try to absorb, and sometimes I get so quiet that people are always saying, "What's the matter with him?" And I guess I'm thinking all the time. We were in Morocco and Spain, and I was dazzled by the mosaic tile, the vibrance of colors, the smells. If anybody's been to Morocco, the smells, and the flies. Is it a friendly country? Going from Spain to Morocco was one of the most incredible experiences, because when you're in Spain, it's not a lot different than here. When you go to Morocco, it's like what I can imagine that Livingston felt when he first got to Africa, is that we get off this boat that we'd been on for almost 12 hours, but we had to go 12 miles across the Gibraltar Strait. But we kept getting in big waves, and I got sick, and everybody got sick. We finally get off the boat, and this little man grabs our luggage and hauls ass down the road. And wanted money for taking our luggage from the boat up the hill about 50 feet. And thereafter, the experience was like they didn't want you to see them sometimes. And so the photographs show that. This was the on the boat, and it was the icon that boats have. It didn't look like this at all, but since I was so seasick, when I was thinking back about it, I transformed her into something else. And I photograph in Alabama and Georgia, Mississippi, and around of buildings, and the oldest building that I photographed is probably 1795, and this gets into the BCs here. So it really does put some things in perspective. And that brings us to the conference. So when I first got here, it took several days to get my act together and to understand, if you've dealt with photographers, they shoot and they'll shoot for weeks and then they'll send you the images. What we had agreed upon is that I would shoot and process, put it on a computer, print, and then do a PowerPoint presentation. Had I done this before? Not until 2 weeks before I came. My head was so big with technical information, and I am not a technical person. I mean, I'm a creative photographer, but I have to rely upon a lot of my staff to show me a bunch of stuff. And so I had all this information, I had a lot of notes, and I've had a great support from Maggie, Carly, and Mandy. So I get here, and it's supposed to be a serious writers' convention, and I think that it's a comedians' convention because behind the scenes, these guys are constantly having a good time. It's been one of the most enjoyable experiences being with these people day in, day out, listening to what they have to say, feeling what they have to say, and then taking these portraits. So Nora Ephraim is the first one. Hollywood, not the writer. And I've been photographing some writers. So I had 5 seconds with Nora. I leaned down to take my picture because I had this great idea of all these lights in the ceiling that would look like Hollywood. And no sooner had I gotten down that she reaches out to grab my camera and say, "Nobody photographs from me from a low angle." And I have that photograph, so I stood up with my assistants, they call the chipettes, doing our lighting. And I think you'll see through these portraits, we really worked hard to try to have something, a natural feel that shows environment. And it's not to say that I had to change certain things. This was a tan wall that I made blue because I liked her shirt. These are our editors that came in. Margaret was kind of the very first one I photographed, and it took forever to pin her down. And finally, when we arrived, she just was walking all around, and I pulled her aside and I said, "You know, when you were up there for 45 minutes, you had that audience spellbound. All I ask for is give me 5 minutes. Don't look here, don't look there, just pay attention to me." And we had, I thought we were going to have 5-10 minutes. We had 2 hours at Dallas's house, and it was a great afternoon, and it set the tone for the rest of the portraits of the writers, of pulling in the environment. Annette. Now, there are some Don Hoes among us. What can you say about Billy Collins? He's just a great guy, and we have had a wonderful time both being water boys. Every time I turn around, he's in water and I'm in the water. So I felt like he needed to be photographed in the water. Our lovely couple that got married in 2 weeks. The Sillerman's house became a backdrop. I couldn't have asked for anything better in Hollywood. I'm sure they have these back lots that have acres and acres, but I was able to find everything I needed in a short, in a it's not a small place, but a nice place. But everything, the locations, the light, and we would wait till late afternoon, the early. I had McKinley running around, we had Laura running around, and we had Bob running around, and there was so much energy that was given back to us that made my photographs, I think, turn out well. Now, I would walk into classrooms sometimes, and I would see the professors dumbed down, thinking about maybe what they were hearing. But then afterwards, as they were reading your material and really putting it in the proper perspective, kind of isolating each of your stories. She's beautiful, isn't she? Clark, a deep thinker. And what to do about Clark? Well, Clark represents the landscape to me. And so that's where I photographed him. Dava, interesting lady, astronomy, science. The plants behind her was as close to space as I could get. Now, occasionally I saw some things I didn't really understand. Now, I was brought here in a serious workshop environment. But this guy, I found him doing some unique things, as you'll see during the slideshow. Frank, you know, I've heard in his interviews, misery, misery, misery. But I found the man, as Blakely said, you know, if he jumped out of a spaceship on Saturn, he'd have a smile on his face and he would have a good time. Frank has a good time. The misery is a front. Now, he did have a few moments for romance. And you know, Beth is an incredibly beautiful woman, and they snuck out, and I just happened to be there at one of those moments. Jules. You know, interesting guy with his drawings and caricatures, and I just had to do the halo with him. I saw these lines on the stairwell, and I saw the potential of what it could be by adding some light. Blakely hit the light behind him. It was afternoon light coming in, but it's my homage to his beautiful drawings. This was a toughie. This was a toughie. We sat in on the dress rehearsal of Kathleen, Roy, and Alan. And I'd really never, on Big Time People, ever watched anything like this, but they all came in to read John's play. And I sat down and snuggled in my chair, and it was the most awful thing to begin with. You just can't imagine. But then, after 5 minutes, it got better. After 10 minutes, it was incredible. At the end, I was speechless because they found their character. I'd never seen that. I mean, these people walked in and literally had no clue about this play, started reading it, got very little direction from John, but when he did say something, it was right to the point. But it was interesting watching them find their character. This was one of the quickest portraits of all, maybe besides Dr. Rose. And to get him to slow down, he kept saying, yes, you can take my picture, but then he'd run off again. So Robert helped me corral him. I really wanted to turn him the opposite way. I'd made arrangements for the guy to have these bank of lights, and it was going to be incredible. So I had to create these lights behind him. This was a wonderful afternoon photographing. Matt's just what he is. I do have if all of you remember the softball game, and I was there taking photographs, there is a very revealing beginning photograph. And there were two captains. There was one captain that had this grimace on his face like he was going to win at any cost. And there was another captain that smiled a lot. Now, I can't remember who won. Maybe y'all remember who won? And he smiles a lot. And he's got such a good spirit. And I always wondered what it was. And I found it when I photographed one evening. The strange phenomena happened is that he actually has two wives. I love this. I love this. For each author, I wanted something special, and you look at his books, and he represents us well in America. And I was thinking, what can we do here? And so I found a cornfield. We got a deal going right now for cornflakes for middle-aged people. He is going to be the spokesperson. That shows the congeniality that we all had, that they had behind the scenes as well as what you felt in the classroom. He did have his moments. And then I'm just not sure what to say. But it got worse before it got better.
Oh, no.
I have never seen anybody turn so red in my life. That's all. Tomorrow, we can turn the lights back up. Jamie was asking about the light. The best way to describe it is that I sometimes turn off all the lights and close my eyes and see color, see the light. And that's one of the things that I try to convey to my students, is that if you don't have light and the way the light hits something, and you go back to the early photographers all the way up to Robert Mapplethorpe, look at his photographs, it's the light. I did have a show where I opened one night with Sally Mann, but Sally didn't show up. I was there, and if any of you know her work, she's been real controversial. She's one of the best photographers around, but the critics and the Baptists didn't want to talk about Chip Cooper's work. They wanted to talk about my reaction to Sally Mann's work, and that was a tough night because I felt, in the arts we're all being attacked, and particularly in Alabama, it's hard sometimes to show things. Would Robert Mapplethorpe been received 15 years ago? No. Would he today? There's so many neat things that are happening in the South. One of the wonderful things of the automobile dealership industries are coming. Creates jobs, more education. And so the environment for somebody like me, and a lot of things that I photograph, the possibilities are greater, because I always thought maybe I should be in Chicago, San Francisco, and I made a decision I need to stay in Alabama. Would I like to live here? Yeah, I might.